Hi class. This is one of two brief videos for our class session 3 that's meeting online. And this first video is about the types of argument and ways of being persuasive. So again, last week we spoke a little bit about thinking about local issues and a little bit about audience, and of course we spoke about writing your research paper and selecting a topic. This week, as you are hopefully narrowing down those topics and making decisions for your research paper, I want to talk to you about how you're going to argue and how you're going to hopefully be persuasive, with the hopes that as you're doing your research, you're going to find evidence that you'll be able to use in the different ways you can argue, and the different ways you can be persuasive. So, to start off with, Aristotle said that there were three types of speeches. The first, forensic, and this primarily relates to things that are legal in nature. Of course, predominantly talking about justice. So, Aristotle said that these kind of argumentative speeches were to kind of determine what happened, to argue for someone's guilt or innocence, to maybe put forth a theory as to what did happen, not just giving a history of what happened. And a great example of a forensic speech would be a lawyer's closing statement, but certainly there can be forensic types of writing, where again we're talking about someone's guilt or innocence, again often relating to documents that are written for court cases. Epidictic, that word always kills me, is one that you probably won't worry about very much in this class, but it's typically related to eulogies at funerals. It's about commemorating, it's about remembering how people are. Sometimes it can be about assigning blame or praise. Sometimes it can be about assigning qualities to people or qualities to something. And again, probably the least argumentative of the three types of speeches, but certainly you're putting forth a theory. If someone wasn't really a great person and you're writing a fairly positive eulogy, you're certainly going to use some persuasive tactics to try to make people remember the good qualities of that person. So the third and the most relative to our course is the deliberative type of speech. And this type of speech is usually used when you want to make a case for something in terms of people changing their actions, considering a different course of thought, pointing out that something's maybe causing harm. And this kind of both writing and speech, you'll see more in Senate kind of situations, when people are talking about passing laws. Again, and when you're talking about things that are happening in the local government, deliberative is really important. So it's all about utility. So that will be the main focus. And as you look at the textbooks, you'll see them talking about deliberative speech, which also pertains to deliberative argument. So make sure you pay close attention to those, as deliberative is the mode of argument that we're going to be focusing on. Now, within being deliberative, Aristotle said there were three proofs, or three ways of being persuasive. And of course, they're still using the Greek word. So the first that we'll talk about is logos. And you'll see that I have the little man here who's doing this complicated math problem. But that's really where logos kind of came from. It's all about logic. When we think about logic, we can think about old math proofs. I remember when I was taking geometry, logic was part of how we got to our answer when we were doing a geometrical proof. It's kind of the same idea. Logic is always very successful in terms of setting up an argument, because if you can move logically from one step to the next, you're more likely to keep your audience engaged, and you're more likely to keep them on the same page as you are. So for example, if there was a really dangerous street corner where there was no stoplight, you could kind of make your own syllogism, which would be to say, if you had data, stoplights prevent accidents. There's no stoplight at that corner. If we put a stoplight in the corner, it would prevent accidents. So that's an example, kind of a logic proof for a syllogism. Sometimes you don't need that intermediary step of the syllogism. So if we just said stoplights prevent accidents, and then look at the end of that syllogism in that if we add a stoplight here, it will prevent accident, that's likely to be agreeable to everyone. People will understand, and they don't need that connection to be made for them in the middle. Another way that logic works is when you give examples within a document or a speech. So when you talk about maybe another area of town that had a stoplight put in and how things changed, that's a real life working example, and that's a great way to convince someone that they should maybe come on board and think the way that you're thinking. Logic probably should be in every argument or any kind of argument that you make, whether written or verbal. And even though it might not seem like the most convincing way to make an argument, as much as maybe something more emotionally based might be more convincing, it's really important to have that logic to fall back on, because no matter the emotional state of the audience, the logic would always be there. The second type of proof that Aristotle mentions is ethos. And you'll notice here I put a picture of the ethos water. I don't know how many of you go to Starbucks. I was a huge Starbucks fan. And they sell ethos water, and a portion of the money that is made from the sale of ethos water goes back to cleaning water up in third world or developing nations. So it's a very ethical way of doing business, and so I keep that in mind whenever I think of the word ethos and try to remember what it means. It's a type of argument of character. For the most part, when you're talking about ethos, you're actually talking about the audience assessing you. How credible are you? How ethical are you? And how trustworthy are you? So when you're doing your research and you're trying to think about the argument that you're going to make, you need to think about how you're going to present yourself in an ethical manner and how you're going to establish your credibility and your trustworthiness. At the bottom here, you'll see 4 ways that you might want to do this. First is actions. So if you want to make an argument about people recycling, you need to put your money where your mouth is and actually do some of that recycling yourself. That also goes with deeds. So what you do, if you say that you're going to do something, that you do it. So both committing to action and the things that you've done are hugely important in terms of establishing credibility and trustworthiness. The third thing is understanding. So demonstrating that you have a very broad understanding, and this is what's critical about you doing a research paper, is that you're going to show that you have a broad understanding of what's going on, what the different sides are, what the heart of the issue is. And the final thing is expertise. And this comes into play, especially as we think about things like proposals for work that are still argumentative. I mean, you're still saying, pick me over another contractor or another organization. And to do that is to establish expertise. And that's probably why a lot of you are in school. Regardless of what your degree is in, a certain level of expertise comes by having a bachelor's degree. Certainly military experience, whatnot, all that's a certain level of expertise. You can also have expertise about specific topics. So you can establish what you know about recycling, or you can establish what you know about civil engineering and stoplights, depending on whatever kind of argument that you want to make. So ethos is pretty important. But the last but not least proof shared with us by Aristotle is pathos. Pathos is really important because it refers to the emotional state of the audience. And not just how they're coming into your argument, but rather what kind of emotion you're evoking from them. So again, when we talk about local issues, people tend to get more passionate about things that are going to impact them, impact their community. You know, parents can get really passionate when they find out, you know, they move to an area for a particular school, and suddenly due to rezoning, their students now in a different school district. Now, if I was buying a house and paying property taxes and wanted my kid in a specific school, I'd be pretty passionate about that as well. Of course, there are many other examples, whether it's zoning, taxes, because when we start talking about people's finances, the well-being of their family members, people tend to get more emotional and thus thinking of the pathos about that issue. The trick for you as the writer is to think about how you're going to read that audience pathos about this issue. So when you're considering your audience, you have to think, does this group of people have an emotional state about this issue? Or do I need to create one? If there already is one, do I need to change what that emotional state is? Although logic and ethical natures of arguments are really, really critical, oftentimes it's pathos or the emotional state that is what really sells home an argument. So if you think about presidential elections or issues where people are really getting other people riled up, protest rallies, for example, people get really emotionally involved, and that changes how they feel about things. It might be for a brief period of time, might be permanently. But the more passionate you are, the more likely you're going to fight for change. The more passionate you can make an audience member, the more likely they're going to support your idea. So that's the end of video 1. And again, as you're doing your research for your research paper, you want to keep those things in mind. Am I going to present a logical argument on my topic? And what do I need to present a logical argument on my topic? What sort of research? Have I established myself as a good character in terms of speaking about this argument? Do I have deeds and actions? Do I have a good understanding? Again, coming back to research. And do I have the expertise that I need to be able to talk about this issue convincingly to an audience? And finally, what is the emotional state of my audience? Are they already angry about this issue? Are they sad? Are they happy about it? If they're content and I want them to make a change, how am I going to inspire that change? So again, as you're doing your research, keep all of that in mind, because you might need additional information that you weren't even thinking about just to kind of meet those criteria. If you have any questions about any of this, let me know, and be sure to watch video 2.